Well, good evening, everyone. We're back with you for our extra class license series using the
General class.
General class. Thank you very much. Yeah, we just did the extras, so I still have that on the brain. So good to be with you. We're going to be going through Chapter 2 tonight in the amateur, the license manual, ARRL license manual. And I'll be sharing a lot of little tidbits along the way that I think will be helpful in your ham radio career. The questions and answers are just that. I mean, you can study them and memorize them, but knowing some of the background behind it will actually help you in your operating environment as you go forward. So if anybody's picking up on this after we're running the class live, we do maintain a mailing list while the class is running over the 10 weeks. But all of the information, all of the handouts referenced, they all appear in the description section that Gary updates the morning after our class. So anything that you see there or hear us talk about will be available to you if you're joining this months later. So HF techniques will be new to a lot of you if you've only operated as a technician, so we'll spend a lot of time on some of those basics, and we'll roll it from there. Now the plan tonight is to go through the chapter, and I'll have a calculator demo at the end using the TI-36X Pro. We're just going to be going over basic functions, so if you don't have your calculator yet or you're not using that particular calculator, I think you'll be able to follow along with us okay. And then I'll also be demonstrating the ARRL exam review tool, because we really want you to use that. Okay, so there's two sections in this chapter, 2.1, HF operating techniques, and section 2.2 is on emergency communications. There's only 3 pool questions in that section, so that won't take us very long to go through. But these are some of the things we're going to be doing in the first section, which will be most of the evening. I'll make an adjustment here. There we go. So these are the things that we'll be talking about. So first of all, does anybody know what radio this is? You can unmute and yell it out if you do.
Column 7300.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah, this is a radio that is just absolutely ideal for a new ham or a ham that's new to HF. There are several out there that are really good, but if I were just starting out, this is the one that I would want. I'm kind of an ICOM guy anyway, but yeah, the Yaesu FT710 is awesome. Some people go with the Yaesu 991A. They're all good radios, but I wanted to kind of feature this one. All right. So we talked about operating techniques being a little bit different on HF. If you've just been doing repeaters on 2 meters, everything is channelized. With HF, you've got a big knob on the radio, and you can tune to any frequency on the band, just not in specific channel increments. So that'll be a little bit different. And there's going to be a smattering of different topics, all of which are important, and most of which will have pool questions in them. So just kind of hang in with us as we change directions this evening. So CQ is first thing up here. It says on the phone bands, just repeat CQ a few times, followed by this is, then your call sign a few times, then pause to listen and rinse and repeat, as they say. So that's fairly easy if you're just getting on and wanting to find somebody. There's something called a directed CQ. A directed CQ is when you're wanting to talk to somebody specific. An example of that is CQDX. DX means a distance contact. So CQDX means calling stations other than one's own country. And some people, what does CQ mean? Well, if you think of the words seek you, that kind of will help you remember what that is. That's not its origination, but it's been helpful to some people. So CQDX means calling people outside your own country. And in the United States, that means Alaska and Hawaii are DX, because they're outside the contiguous 48 states. More on that a little later. Oh, right here. CQDX within the contiguous 48 means calling any station outside the lower 48. So if I'm calling CQDX, Alaska and Hawaii, Mexico, Canada, Europe, would all be people that I'd be interested in talking to. choosing a frequency is a little bit different here. We obviously have FCC regulations that say where we can operate, which modes and which frequencies. We'll be looking at band charts a little bit later. And something called a volunteer band plan. The FCC has rules that say you're only allowed to operate in these areas with this level of power, with these modes, say single sideband or CW, and others. But beyond, the FCC guidelines are fairly broad. Hams have gotten together and come up with what's called the voluntary band plans. And these are just ways to be a little bit more organized, so you know where to find radio teletype, you know where to find DX, that sort of thing. We'll be sharing that with you. I did send out an email this afternoon, probably 3 o'clock or so. Those of you that received it by now and may have printed it out, a copy of the current band plan is there. I think it's called the Considerate Operators Frequency Guide or something like that. So you might want to have that handy. If you didn't get that or didn't print it, it's okay. You just follow along with us. So you can ask if the frequency is already in use. You can listen a little bit before you do that to be sure that it appears to be clear, and then ask if the frequency is in use and see if anybody responds. Now, breaking into a conversation, if you happen to be listening to an existing conversation that's going on, we're talking about single sideband for the moment, maybe there's a couple of hams that are talking about antenna design, or maybe they're talking about the ICOM 7300, something that you happen to have a great interest in. If you want to join that conversation, you can attempt to do so. So the method of doing that is to just say your call sign one time during a pause in the conversation. Hopefully there will be a pause in the conversation. So to break into an ongoing phone contact, just say your call sign once. If they hear you, they'll come back and they'll ask for breaking station, or they'll say your call sign and go ahead, and you can announce your interest in joining them if they'd be willing for you to do so. So that's one way you can get involved with a conversation. Now there's also something called break-in keying on CW, or Morse code, which is a totally different concept. So we'll touch on that now. Now, full break-in, now there's a lot of abbreviations, Q signals. QSK is one, QSL, QRL, there's all kinds of them. We'll be sharing some of those as we move on this evening. And you can Google to find a whole list of, I don't know, 50 or 60 of them, but there's probably just a handful, probably less than a dozen, that you'll commonly hear on the air. But full break-in, that concept, okay, QSK means a radio that's capable of switching between transmit and receive very rapidly. So the how about the radio operator can receive between sending of dots and dashes while transmitting? This might sound kind of amazing, but if you're on CW, you're chattering away, the other person that you're talking to can hold their key down, and you'll actually hear it between your dots and dashes. That's one way to get somebody's attention if you're participating in a conversation and you're getting too long-winded and they want to jump in. So that's the concept of full break-in on CW. You need a radio capable of rapid transmit-receive switching, and it allows the station to break in immediately. There's another concept called semi-break-in, where while you're sending CW or Morse code, it will keep the transmitter keyed for maybe a quarter of a second or a half a second. You're not hearing in between the dots and dashes, and that's called semi-break-in. And for somebody new to CW, that might be a better way to do it, because hearing band noise and other things going on while you're sending can be confusing, but you'll get used to it really quick, especially if you get into any contesting. Now, a lot of the newer radios have another mode, so you can set break-in to full break-in, where you can hear between dots and dashes, very fast transmit-receive switching. Semi-break-in, where it'll hold the transmitter keyed for maybe a quarter of a second. That's an adjustable timing within your radio. And then a lot of radios have something where you can set break-in to none. So it's none, semi, and full. And the cool thing about setting break-in to none, when you do that, the radio won't transmit at all, but you can still hear yourself sending. So it's a wonderful tool for practicing CW sending. So that's the purpose of that. So not a lot of blue text here. Again, blue text means it's something that's going to appear on the exam. So anytime I put up a slide with blue text, I highly recommend maybe you read that 2 or 3 times while the slide is up so you can say, oh, I'm going to remember that because we're going to see it again. So, excuse me, good practices for choosing a frequency. You want to avoid harmful interference because the ham bands are open to all hams everywhere, worldwide. So if you ask if the frequency is in use, and to do that, just say, is this frequency in use? This is KE4EA. So is this frequency in the use? My call sign. Then ask again, giving your call sign. And if there's a net or some other scheduled activity ready to start, there'll be people already tuned in. They'll say, oh, we've got a net that's going to start in 5 minutes. Bug off. No, they won't say that. But they'll say, they'll let you know, and then you can move someplace else and try. In CW, you send the Q code QRL, which means is this frequency in use? QRL question mark, DE call sign. So that's how you can make sure you're not going to cause, you're kind of asking permission to use the frequency. Make sure nobody else is there. Now this is a key point, also a pool question, except during emergencies, no amateur station has priority access to any frequency. So that's just, we have to, I think Gary said in the last class, we have to act like adults, right? We have to negotiate. If something else is going on, be willing to move. If that's possible, it usually will be. Again, no one owns a frequency, and the key concept here is have a plan B. So if Gary and I were planning on getting together on some frequency, so say 20 meters someplace at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we both show up there and somebody else is there, well, it would have been really good for us to say, if that frequency is busy, let's try up 5 kilohertz and try to reach each other that way. So I always have a plan B. That's that concept. Now there's one question that talks about voluntary band plan, and it's a 6-meter thing. We're going to look at the Considerate Operator's Frequency Guide, or whatever it's being called these days, and that only covers the HF bands, but there's actually a chart that covers all of them. So in the case of 6 meters, 50.1 to 50.125, you don't have to memorize that, you'll recognize it as soon as you see the pool question, is for contacts not within the lower 48 states. So this is kind of has the concept of a DX window. I haven't really talked about DX windows, but they're locations on the band that people respect for people wanting to make DX contacts. So they wouldn't use these frequencies for everyday rag chews. So be aware of that. So good practices, there's some recommended spacings for signals. On CW, it's good if you can be between 150 and 500 kilohertz or hertz away from an existing conversation that's going on. And in contesting, I'm usually at 150 because there's so many signals on the band. But 500 is probably more average. Single sideband, because it requires a 3 kilohertz space, you almost have to be a full channel or a full spectrum. Well, if it takes up 3 kilohertz of spectrum, you want to be at least that far away. And then here's some other ones, radio teletype and PSK 31. But these two appear on the exam. Just how close you can operate next to somebody else that's already there. Now, propagation is really interesting. Most of the propagation that we're excited about on HF has to do with signals being refracted or reflected, some people like to call it, from the ionosphere, where they go up to the ionosphere and come bouncing back down again and lets you talk worldwide. Now, this changes over the day. It has to do with how much the sun is, how much of the ultraviolet light from the sun has ionized the ionosphere, okay? So during the day, propagation will come in and go out. So if you might notice some interference, you might all of a sudden start hearing stations that weren't there before that are now interfering with the contact that you're making. Just be aware that that can happen. So what are we supposed to do then? Well, we attempt to resolve the interference problem with the other stations in a mutually acceptable manner. In other words, like Gary says, we have to act like adults, right? So we all have to get along, children. Yep. So networks are an interesting feature of ham radio that you have probably experienced in VHF. A lot of local clubs run a nightly net or a weekly net where people check into the net, just give their call sign, their location, and if they want to stick around for anything special like rag chew, they'll mention that. A lot of us have done that on 2 meters. So common interests and the nets are alive and well on HF. The difference on HF is that they can cover a much larger geographic area. So there's something called a youth net, an old timers net. I don't think that would apply to any of us. No. There's traffic nets. I don't know if you've ever heard of a radiogram. That's where you actually compose a message from you to your Aunt Sally in Nebraska. And you put it on a traffic net, it'll go out to a ham in Nebraska who will try to deliver that message to your Aunt Sally, either by telephone or if they can't get it to her any other way, they might put it in an envelope and mail it to her. But that's the idea of a radiogram and how traffic nets work. I'll show you a little picture of how those are structured in a little while. Then there's the emergency service nets that only come on the air in an emergency. The 2 meter nets that many of you are familiar with are there, and it's interesting to do that and hear who checks in, but that is good practice for coming into full operation during an emergency, because then the net control manager will handle anything that's going on, you know, where are the power lines down, is there flooding in this area, and that goes over the net. So you can see a list of nets, both HF and VHF, at this URL. These are the ones that the ARRL is familiar with. There's bunches and bunches of them there. So if you're looking for something to do on HF and you have a particular interest, you might find a net dedicated to that. So good amateur practice for net management. Remember, nobody owns a frequency. So have a backup frequency in case of interference or poor conditions. It's just a very good practice. A little picture of a bunch of networked people here. And then a little bit more on band plans. I touched on this earlier. So FCC regulations will specify modes and frequencies that we can use, and people will tend to stay together in those areas. They have to, according to law. But additional assignments have been created by hams working amongst one another, and they've come up with voluntary band plans that can be extremely useful. And one of the handouts I sent out this afternoon was titled The Considerate Operator's Frequency Guide, which we'll probably talk a little bit more, about in a minute. But this also appears on page 2-3 in your book. So here's just a little piece of a band plan. Kind of blown up so that we can almost read it. Yeah, I guess this is visible. So in the 20 meter band plan, you see there's a QRP CW calling frequency. So if you're a QRP user, meaning 5 watts or less on CW or Morse code, 14.060 is a good place to call CQ. And then if somebody answers you there, that they'd be looking for QRP CW ops, then you can move off to another frequency by mutual agreement, leaving the calling frequency open. Here's a range for radio teletype, automatically controlled data. It's a place where WinLink stations would be listening. There's something called beacon stations. These are stations that transmit periodically at specified times, and if you can hear that beacon, that indicates propagation would be open to that area. So designated frequencies for those. Automatically controlled data, there's a little bit more of it. And two of them here. And then a place for slow scan TV. So we had a student in the past, this was a very legitimate question. He looked at the band plan and said, well, I see all kinds of stuff here, but where can I just operate ordinary single sideband or ordinary CW? And if you look at this, these, they're not really reserved, they're just recommended areas. They're very tiny, extremely tiny. So the vast majority of the band is open for general use, single sideband or CW. And here's some more. different kinds of activities: slow scan TV, digital voice, QRP, AM. Some hams still use amplitude modulation. And again, this band plan appears on page 2-3 in your manual. These specified frequencies some people refer to as watering holes. It's where people hang out to congregate and find each other and then move off to other frequencies. So these are only guidelines. So we need to be flexible. During a contest, you'll find out that the entire band is just packed with contest stations, and the band plans pretty much go out the window, but contests only run for a limited period. So just be aware of that. If you had some very special thing you were going to do with a Summits on the Air or Parks on the Air activation, you might want to find out if there's a contest running that weekend to maybe, so you don't get in each other's way. There's a concept called DX windows. The concept of a DX window is a part of the band that everybody has just by mutual consent said we're not going to have regular QSOs in that area. If somebody's wanting to call CQDX, this is a part of the band they can do it without being interfered with. And of course, if you make the contact, you'd usually move it off into a different part of the band. So DX windows are a section of the band where DX stations may be contacted. Contacts between U.S. stations in the contiguous 48 states should occur outside this window. So if Gary and I want to just be rag chewing about what we're going to do for the next class, we wouldn't do it in the DX window.
Or we get yelled at.
Yeah, sometimes people will yell at you. I think I have this note later in the presentation, but amateur radio is a very friendly community, very decent people, but there's bad apples in every barrel, okay? So there are people that will yell at you or say, hey, I was on this frequency first, or I've always had my thing here every day for the last 20 years. Well, okay, just leave them alone, go somewhere else. Very few like that, though.
Yeah, I didn't want to scare anybody by saying that, but
Yeah.
just be aware.
Be adults. Okay, contests. This is something that I've gotten into in a fairly big way in the last maybe year and a half. Very popular activity on HF. The idea is to, there's going to be a contest sponsor who puts together the rules and regulations, and then anybody participating in the contest, their goal is to make as many contacts as they possibly can in the operating window. They can be as little as 1 hour contests, or 8 or 12. There's some contests that run 48 hours, believe it or not. There's actually hams who are diehard hams that will operate all 48 hours without a break. I don't know how they do that. But I was just at a contest dinner in Florida, and there were some folks there that, in fact, the main speaker had done that once or twice. That's beyond what I want to do. So what are the FCC requirements for contests? Well, you have to identify your station per normal FCC regulations. That just seems to make a lot of sense. Normally that's at the beginning and the end of a conversation, but during contests, just identifying in the beginning of a very short 5-second exchange is adequate. Field day, highly recommend field day. This happens the last full week of June all over the United States and Canada. Your club probably participates in field day. This is a master class in operating for a new ham. So you've got to be a part of field day this year. You'll not regret it. Field day is not a contest. It's an operating event, but you're working as many people as you can during the period, and a lot of people will treat it like a contest. So it's a good introduction there. Interference. Yeah, this is the bane of HF. You've got to live with it, know how to work with it, and you'll get to do the things that you want ultimately. So several reasons. Now there's QRM. And I think Gary mentioned last time that M, if you can associate that with man-made, it's like other signals on the band. So QRM is interference from other legitimate signals, let's say. QRN, and there's a pool question on this one, and the text of the pool question says, I am troubled by static. So that's noise, interference from noise and static, such as storms, motors, power lines, etc. QRN, if you can think of the N on the end of it, is associated with natural or noise. That'll help you keep QRM and QRN separate. Now, occasionally there's harmful interference. This is when people deliberately transmit to interfere with somebody. Very, very rare, but it does happen. Some of you might have experienced this with a person on a 2-meter repeater, for example, and then the club that owns that repeater has to do some direction finding and try to track down where it's coming from. So it seriously degrades, obstructs, repeatedly interrupts communication. There have been humongous fines from the FCC for people who have done this sort of thing. The bad apple thing, the tiny, less than 1%, I would say, of all hams would be in that category. Yep, and so if you run into that, don't engage, don't try to argue with somebody, just leave, because you won't get anywhere. There's plenty of band there. So managing interference. Each band is a little bit different depending upon the time of day, the levels of noise. For example, the lower bands, 80 meters, 160 for sure, they tend to have a lot of natural noise. So if you know that, you pick times when the noise might be less, like late at night. So your station is going to have certain strengths and weaknesses, particularly your antenna system. Try to keep your transmitted signal clean. There are several initiatives going on in the industry right now. Anand, who has something called Pure Signal. That's not a real popular radio, but it's an excellent one. ICOM and others have something called the pre-distortion, where they actually look at the noise, the transmitter noise, and invert it and cancel it. And it makes a huge difference. So the ARRL has an initiative to try to encourage manufacturers to use that method, because it helps weak signals next to strong signals be heard. Directional antennas, you can point away from the interference. And again, nobody owns a frequency. Be flexible and move if you need to. So typical contact exchanges, calling or answering a CQ. So typically you would exchange call signs, locations, and signal reports. And here's something that I hadn't thought too much about. Signal reports are typically exchanged at the beginning of an HF contact to allow each station to operate according to conditions. Well, what in the world does that mean? Well, if you've got a really strong signal, if the person you're talking to says that you've got a very strong signal, 5.9 for example, on sideband, well, maybe you can back your power down a little bit and still have that conversation without any trouble. Turning your power down is going to reduce interference to other hams that might be distant, but using that same frequency or even adjacent. So that would be one example why you would want to know what your signal strength is as being received. Another one, maybe you want to point your antenna differently. If the signal strength is weak to the DX station you're working in Alaska, you can barely hear them. And you notice that if you've got a directional antenna, like a beam antenna, and it's not pointed at Alaska, well, swing it over there, and you might find that the signal strength goes up. So that's what's meant by to allow each station to operate according to conditions. And that's why these signal strength reports are typically exchanged at the beginning of a QSO. And then after getting those preliminaries out of the way, you can talk about weather, what kind of station are you running, what kind of antennas, ham interests, ham radio interests, personal information. There are two areas that are discouraged though. You might want to skip politics and religion, for example. Most hams hear enough of that on news channels and so forth, and would prefer not getting into those discussions on the ham bands. But you hear it all the time, so I'll share that for what it's worth. I'm passionate about both religion and politics, but I never talk about it on the radio or people who I don't know. Okay, CW mode. This is something that I enjoy very much. Back when I first got started in ham radio as a novice, back in the late 60s, you had to pass a 5-word per minute CW code test to get your license. That all kind of fell away, and I just got back into it over the last 4 or 5 years. CW is usually found near the bottom of each HF band, but can be transmitted on almost any amateur frequency. Some people aren't aware of this. They don't do it very often, and it's frowned upon somewhat, but you can legally transmit CW any place in the ham band, even in the phone sections. It's legal, but most people are respectful of the sideband folks and just stay within the CW sections. Speeds vary from 5 to 50 words a minute. 5 is very slow, 50 is, that's burning speed. Now it's polite and it's a pool question. Answer a CQ at the speed at which it was sent. So if somebody's sending CQ at 5 words per minute, it's really, really rude to come back to that poor person that can only do 5 words a minute at 20 words a minute. So you want to answer a CQ at the speed at which it was sent. And most ops will slow down if you'll send QRS. That's another Q code. QRS means slow down, please. And most will. Most hams want to do well for people who are not at their level. Very polite that way. So all different ways of sending CW. This is called a straight key. This is a paddle and a straight key on one base. Another straight key, and something called a bug. A bug is kind of a unique device. If you press the paddle one way, you'll get just a continuous, it'll transmit continuously. You use that for sending dashes. The other side, if you press it, it'll send a series of dots, as long as you hold that side of the paddle down. So you alternate between dots and dashes to do your sending. It's much faster than a straight key. And when these things first came out, they really revolutionized CW many years ago. So AM and single sideband. Let's look at the picture at the bottom, and that'll pretty much explain all of this. With the amplitude modulation, what we're doing is we're sending a carrier and a lower sideband and an upper sideband. But if you think about it, now the audio information on the lower sideband and upper sideband, the audio information is identical. It's just reversed in frequency. So if you look at this, you could say, well, if I could get rid of the carrier and I could get rid of one of the sideband, all I'd really need to do is transmit the upper sideband or the lower, whichever you happen to be using for that band. So that's exactly what happens with single sideband. The carrier is suppressed, one of the sidebands is suppressed or filtered, leaving just the other sideband available. So the voice frequencies that are used by hams, the channel space, if you want to call it that, is typically between 300 and 3,000 hertz. So it's this amount of space here. Now, if you compare that to what you'd have on your hi-fi at home, that's like 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Well, the voice part of the speech is much narrower than that. That's why hams can get away with the 300 to 3,000. So on HF, single sideband is the most common voice signal. In the original days of voice, it was AM, because single sideband didn't exist yet. So it's really funny over the years how people have changed. It used to be all CW. Of course, when the phone came out, AM, people said, well, that's going to ruin ham radio. Okay, well, it hasn't. And then when single sideband came out, the AM people were livid. Oh, that's not real ham radio. And of course, we hear the same argument with digital today. But ham radio is alive and well and has survived all of those battles, so to speak. So single sideband is much narrower than AM. AM would be the full voice frequencies above and below, about 6 kilohertz. So the single sideband bandwidth is narrower because the carrier and one sideband are suppressed and not transmitted. And there's an advantage, single sideband, less bandwidth, greater power efficiency. I read an interesting analogy this week that to me was really helpful. If you take a garden hose, and let's say that you're spraying 1 gallon per minute, and you've got it on a wide spray pattern. Well, that's going to get the ground wet all around the hose, but it won't go very far, okay? If you adjust your nozzle on your hose to make it a tight stream, you get more pressure in that direction, and you can shoot the water a lot further, but it's still the same amount of gallons per minute. If you can relate that to radio, that's the same here. We're going to be able to shoot our signal further if we can concentrate it all in a narrower range. And of course for CW, where we're only concerned with the carrier and on the audio sidebands, that's even better. So that was an analogy that I found kind of helpful in terms of how effective you're using the power. And now you hopefully can understand the single sideband advantage, less bandwidth, and greater power efficiency. Different modes. There's a magic number here that you need to keep in mind. That magic number is 9 megahertz. All right, well, why? So upper sideband is used above 9 megahertz. That'd be the 20 meter through 10 meter band. 20 meters is 14 megahertz, 10 meters is 28. So upper sideband is used on any band that's above 9 megahertz. With one exception. 60 meters is a real oddball. That's always going to use upper sideband if you're using sideband on that band. Lower sideband is used below 9 megahertz. That'd be the 160, 80, and 40 meter bands. 1.8 megahertz, 3.5 megahertz, and 7 megahertz roughly. And it says per commonly accepted amateur practice. All right, well, what does that mean? Well, in the old days, there was a technical reason why it was better to use upper sideband above 9 megahertz and lower sideband below 9 megahertz. Those days are long gone. The radios that we have today will work fine on either one, but the convention never changed. So per commonly accepted amateur practice, this is what you'll use. And it's very effective because if your transceiver is set to upper sideband and there's a lower sideband signal there, you might not be able to hear it at all. So yeah, it's very important to be on the right sideband depending on the band that you're operating on. So upper sideband is used on VHF and UHF bands. Well, VHF and UHF are above 9 megahertz. Okay, so that magic 9 number carries through. Now we've got what's famously called the color chart here. I'll talk more about that in a minute. So lower sideband below 9 megahertz, upper sideband above 9 megahertz. Well, what if you can't remember the association of bands to frequencies? Now you can't use this 9 as your friend. Well, there's a trick you can use. Well, this formula here, the frequency in megahertz, 300 over the band in meters. So if you're looking at, let's say the 80 meter band, well, 80 goes into 300, what, 3 or 4 times? So that will tell you what if you know what the frequency is, you can come up with the band, and vice versa. Both of these work. Just divide what you have into 300, and that'll tell you where you are. So if you don't remember that 80 meters is in the 3.5 megahertz range, you can get to it this way. So the band chart here, okay, there's one in our book on page 3-9, if you're interested. It's in beautiful black and white. Here we've got it in an ugly color. Now the color is gorgeous. I'll just take a little sidebar for a moment. There's a few things that you'll want to have in a manila folder. It can be any color you want, but I call it manila. A few things that you want by your operating desk at all times. The band chart is one, the considerate operator's guide, considerate operator's frequency guide, I should say, the phonetic alphabet, which we haven't talked about yet, and probably a few other things related to your station. You want to keep with you, keep handy all the time, because you will refer to them all the time.
A list of Q codes is always handy.
Q codes, yeah. The RST chart, readability, strength, tone, those are all things that you want to have handy. So let me recommend that right up front. And the handouts that I sent out this afternoon, at least 3 of the 4 of those belong in that folder. There's an offer here. A very generous ham that I know has made an offer that lots and lots of hams have taken us up on, and that's Mr. Gary. Do you want to talk about that, Gary?
Sure. So the color chart is published, this version, from the American Radio Relay League, and we have purchased a large quantity of those, and we would be happy to send one to you. All you have to do is send me an email at w4eey@arrl.net. I'll say it again, w4eey@arrl.net, and say, Gary, I'd like one of those color charts, please. Oh, and here's my mailing address. I need the mailing address. And then we'll put one in the mail to you, and you can have this at your operating position for your HF.
Right. And let me show you something else about what you're going to get from Gary. Over on our calculator cam, I have the chart that Gary will send you if you ask for it. And on the back side of this is the ARRL Worked All States map. And this gives you the abbreviations for all of the states, which can be very handy. It gives you the call zones, 6, 7. We're in call zone number 4. This is something that I use quite a bit in contesting. I can see where people are, the ITU zones that are there. So that's on the back side of the color chart. And this is so useful. I use it so often that I went to my local, I don't know, I guess it was Staples, and asked them to laminate it for me. You can kind of see that it's got plastic border on it. So, and that I think costs like $2 to have something this size laminated. So highly recommend that you do that. We have laminated band plans that we use during field day, and you'll use this all the time. One other feature, the different classes of license, extra, advanced, general, technician. It'll also tell you where they're allowed to operate. So you need one of those. Next, we're going to look at the NATO. It's called the NATO phonetic alphabet. The standard alphabet has changed over the years, but this is the standard phonetics that are used internationally, worldwide. So this is another thing you need to have in your chart. You need to learn this, okay? The only question on the pool, they refer to the Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta phonetics, so you need to be able to recognize those 4 things. But a good way to practice these that somebody came up with is you're driving around and you see a road sign, translate that into phonetics. Like a stop sign would be Sierra, Tango, Oscar, Papa. Okay, so if you can rattle that off and practice road signs as you're driving, you'll learn this pretty quickly. Or if you do any contesting, you'll use it pretty quickly, or you'll learn it pretty quickly. Now, some people think that it's really cute to come up with unique phonetics for their call sign, and that can be fun amongst hams, but when you're on the air, nobody's expecting that and probably won't be able to interpret it. For example, my Elmer, back when I was first getting started in amateur radio in Wisconsin, was W9IEI, and he called it Whiskey 9, I eat ice cream. So that was his cute phonetic. Another one that he'd like to use is Whiskey 9, I eat ice cream. Or I entertain idiots. That was the other one, I entertain idiots. So think of something that you can use amongst your ham friends, but don't use those on the air regularly. Nobody will be expecting it and won't be able to understand what you're saying.
Especially DX stations who English is not their first language.
Yeah, DX stations in particular are really dependent on being able to hear standard phonetics. Sometimes they have some of their own, but you learn those quickly too. All right, lots of knobs on an HF radio compared to your 2-meter radio. There's a lot of buttons and knobs on HF, and they all do something. We won't have to master them all this evening, but I'll mention a few. There's a lot of modern transceivers have what are called dual VFOs, and the point of those is you can transmit on one frequency and listen on another. Very common for DX stations to do that. They'll be calling CQ on one frequency. They might say up 5 when they're calling CQ, DX, their call sign up 5. So what they're wanting you to do is to transmit back to them 5 kilohertz up the band compared to where they're transmitting. But that's one use for dual VFOs. Another one that I have used frequently, I like to chase summits on the air from my home. So they will publish frequencies where they expect to be, date, time, frequency. So I'll put one of my receivers on that frequency and monitor it while I'm trying to work somebody on a different frequency. That way, if they come on the air, I can get them. So that's another use. So monitoring two different frequencies. Okay, the one in the pool is to transmit on one frequency and listen on another. And then also used to monitor two frequencies, like my summits on the air example. So how does this work exactly? So split mode, the transmitter is set to different transceiver is set to different transmit and receive frequencies. So here's somebody in Mauritius, that's off the east coast of Africa. So this is the person out there, it's the DX. So he's transmitting here, but he's listening up 5 kilohertz, transmitting, listening. So the reverse of that is what we have to do when we're chasing that DX. We need to transmit up here and listen down here. It's really helpful if you can listen to both of those frequencies at the same time, which is dual VFOs or dual receivers. If you have that feature in your radio, can be very helpful. But that's the concept of how it's used. Often used by DX stations to spread out callers. Now, the thing is, if the person was calling CQ on a specific frequency and everybody was coming back to him on the same frequency, it'd be total chaos. He wouldn't hear anything but a blur. But when you're listening up 5, you're kind of spread out here. So he can pick out one particular one that he can hear, and then he'll respond on his frequency. So that's why this works. Now, does this sound complicated maybe? Well, perhaps it does. If you don't understand how to set up split in your radio or how to use it, I have a suggestion for you. Find a friend and practice. So Gary and I, if I didn't really understand how to do this, we could set up split between us, and he could transmit here, I could listen here and transmit back to him here. And if that works, well, I just learned how to run split on my radio. So practice with a friend, because if you get into a DX situation, these guys are popular. I mean, ultra popular. Sometimes the pileups are massive. It's really hard to get through. So to learn your equipment, that's a technique that you can use to learn how to set up and do that. 60 meters is an oddball. Okay, it's in the 5 megahertz range if you look on your band plan. It's unique because it is channelized. We have very specific frequency ranges or channels on 60 meters. I think there's 5 of them. It's on page 3-9 in your book. You're limited to 100 watts effective radiated power. Of course, our maximum power limit on HF is normally 1,500 watts. And if you're using an antenna other than a dipole, you must keep a record of the gain of your antenna, because you're not the only person in the world operating on that band. That's why it's limited in frequency and power. So there's some unique things about the 60 meter band. A lot of radios might not have a 60 meter button on them to go to that band, but a lot of them can be tuned there and used there. Now, image modes, this is transmitting a picture on the air. Slow scan TV is probably the most popular because you can use an ordinary HF transceiver to transmit and receive slow scan TV. We'll be talking about that in another lesson. But wherever phone transmissions are allowed, you can send slow scan TV images. They're really still images. They're not television as we think of it. All you need is a computer, sound card, which a lot of times is built into the radio, and software, which is generally free. And you can actually transmit images. The International Space Station has done a lot of slow scan TV, and hams enjoy doing that. And you can do this with the equipment you already have. Now, fast scan, this is traditional television, analog. There's also some digital TV that's going on in ham radio now, but it's only used on UHF and up because the bandwidth is so much wider. But slow scan TV you can actually do as soon as you're a general. if you care to. Station logs. I said we were going to jump around among a bunch of different things. All right, now we're going to talk about station logs. So a station log is where you write down information about the people that you talk to on the air. So date and time of contact, what band or frequency, call sign, signal report, anything else you want to write down about that contact you can put there. Now, the one pool question, it says a reason many amateurs keep a station log is to be able to help with a reply if the FCC requests information about your station. Now, the FCC has never asked me about my station, and I don't know of any ham ever who's been asked for that, but this is one reason to maintain that information. It's not a legal requirement, so you won't be thrown in jail if you don't do it. Unlike back in the late 60s, when novices had to record every single transmission they made. If it was a CQ that wasn't answered, if you were just tuning up your transmitter, it had to be in your log. So here's one that you can't read, but just an example of an HF log. So here we've got, this was the original paper log that the ARRL used. I happen to have mine here from when I was a novice back in the late 60s, and had a couple of different call signs. You can still get this same logbook from the ARRL today. It says from book number 67. I guess that was the year 10/14/67. A little hard to read here, but just a bunch of information that I was recording. Yeah, so date and time, station called by, WN9WDZ, that was me. Frequency, signal report, both ways, what frequency, emission, that's CWA1, power input watts back then. Today everything is an output power. Time ending, other data, lost in QRM. He goofed my letters, someone else got him. Okay, so you can record all of this information in a paper log if you wish. So there's, most hams today are using electronic logs. There's free and paid options. It can interface with your radio, something called CAT, or computer automated or computer aided transceiver. So as you're making calls in a contest, it can record the band and frequency and time all automatically for you. You can link electronic logbooks to award databases such as Logbook of the World, Club Log, etc. You can have spotting networks appear in the software. There's many available. I was introduced to something called N3FJP. That's the call sign of Scott Davis, who's the author of this particular software. I was introduced to his products during field day. And the thing that I really like about Scott's program is it's very easy to use, very accessible. If you just want to use the main log, I think you can get it for like 10 or 12 bucks or something like that. You can buy his entire suite of software for, it was 49, it might be 59 now, but he's got all kinds of contest logs and special logs. And if you buy his suite, you not only get amateur contact log, which is like your main log, but you get all of his other specialized logs, and you own that for life, including updates, upgrades. So I highly recommend that one. The one that's most popular among contesters is called N1MM+. It's free, but it's a super steep learning curve, but it does everything. I think it'll even make coffee and wash dishes. I'm not sure about that, though. Now, there's over 100 more logs. If you go to this link here at eham.net, they list 100 different electronic logs there. But I'll make it easy for you and just recommend N3FJP. Talk to 10 hams, you'll get 10 different opinions, but these two are super popular. So those are logbooks. Now, QSL cards. This is a hobby, another aspect to the hobby. This is a picture of my QSL card. And hams using these, QSL means an acknowledgement. They'll actually send postcards to each other confirming their contact. So most of this is done electronically through Logbook of the World today, but a lot of hams still really enjoy paper QSL cards. I have a friend, Alice Corver is her name. She pursued QSL cards from all 50 states in the Union. She had those silk screened onto cloth, copied in silk screen, and made a quilt, believe it or not. So she's got all 50 states on this quilt. It's just another interesting thing you can do with QSL cards. Q signals, we've mentioned a few of these already. So here's a collection. There's probably 50 of them. You can Google, or probably there's a list on the ARRL. Some of these will appear as pool questions. They really started out in the CW world to shorten what you had to send, okay, shorten the length of the contact. So they can be in the form of a statement or a question. So QRN question mark would mean, are you being bothered by atmospheric noise? And you could reply saying, yes, I've got a lot of QRN on my location. QRM, man-made noise, natural versus man-made there. QRV, ready to copy. And you'll usually see this in the context of a DX station saying that they're going to be in Mauritius April 15th through the 20th, and there'll be QRV during those dates, or ready to operate. QSL, I've received and understood. QRL, we mentioned, is the frequency in use. Another one that's common, QRP, means low power, running 5 watts or less. I ran winter field day with my friend Ariel, NY4G, a few weeks back on a Saturday, and we ran the whole winter field day QRP, which I'd never done before, but we enjoyed that. So Q signals, and there's a lot more, but these are the ones in blue that will appear in the pool. Speaking of the pool, all right, first of all, have you ever heard of the 3-second rule? Well, I'll tell you what the 3-second rule is. It says if you drop a cookie on the floor, that cookie's probably going to get germs on it and you don't want to eat it. But if you can pick it up and eat it within 3 seconds, you won't get sick. Okay, so I don't know who came up with that. That's actually been studied scientifically, and bacteria tend to be attracted the longer something is exposed to it. But all of that aside, we have a 3-second rule that we like to use here. We're going to share the questions, and we ask you to pause for 3 seconds before you give the answer. The reason is some people will listen to these offline, and they want to be able to pause the recording so that they can think of an answer. So we want to give them a little time. Plus, we want more than one person to be answering all the questions. So just give us a few seconds from when I finish a question to when you pop up with an answer. We'll ask you to unmute and give the answer, and then we'll tell you if you were right or not. So we wanted to say that and why we do that. Finally, your exam, the answers will not appear in the order that they are in the pool. So don't memorize that the answer to this question happens to be whatever letter, because it'll be a different letter on your exam. Okay, with that, I'm going to read the first question, and then you can unmute and answer it. We'll see if we can get some of these. Which of the following is true concerning access to frequencies? 1, 2, 3.
C.
C, good, okay. Yep, yeah, that was a pretty good 3-second period. Except during emergencies, no amateur station has priority access to any frequency. The reason I read the answer, the question and the answer is that some people will listen to this while they're driving, and if they don't have the privilege of being able to read, but they can listen. So that's why we do that. What is good amateur practice if propagation changes during a contact, creating interference from the other stations using the frequency?
C.
C. Charlie. And phonetics are easier because B and D sound a lot the same. So a phonetic answer would be great. Charlie, attempt to resolve the interference problem with the other station in a mutually acceptable manner. Yes. When selecting a CW transmit frequency, what minimum separation from the other stations should be used to minimize interference to stations on adjacent frequencies? CW now.
Delta.
Bravo is for CW. Delta would be more for single sideband. but for single sideband, you'd want to say 3 kilohertz. Okay, when selecting an SSB transmitting frequency, what minimum separate, now we're talking SSB, single sideband, what minimum separation should be used to minimize interference to stations on adjacent frequencies?
Charlie.
That is, Charlie, 2 kilohertz to 3 kilohertz. How can you avoid harmful interference on an apparently clear frequency before calling CQ on CW or phone?
Alpha.
Bravo.
Okay, well, listening is good, but even if you don't hear anything, the channel might be in use. So A is the best answer. Send QRL on CW, which means this is frequency in use, followed by your call sign, or if using phone, ask if the frequency is in use, followed by your call sign. And you'll get a response if there's somebody getting ready to use it or not getting
Well, the
ready.
manual said that you should listen first
Yes.
and then see if it's in use. That's why my answer was bravo.
Okay, well, we won't flog you, okay? But A is the better answer. I would definitely listen before you do your QRL. Okay, so yeah, you're right. You're right. This is what they're looking for, though. Which of the following complies with commonly accepted amateur practice when choosing a frequency on which to initiate a call?
Charlie.
Yeah, I heard Charlie. It is Charlie. Some of these other things are good things that you could do. You wouldn't transmit your call 3 times, but follow the voluntary band plan is what we're looking for there. What does the Q signal QRL mean?
Delta.
Delta, are you
Delta.
busy, or is this frequency in use? Is this frequency in use is the way that you would typically use that QRL on CW. Which of the following are examples of the NATO phonetic alphabet?
Delta.
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 Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. Yep. Got some funny things in the other answers. You just need to know that. Which of the following is a common use for dual VFO of a transceiver?
Charlie.
Transmit on one frequency and listen on another. Or the other example I gave was listening to 2 frequencies at the same time. But this is the one we want to know. Which of the following is required by the FCC rules when operating in the 60-meter band? Remember, that's the oddball.
Alpha.
Yes, to avoid interference with other people who are sharing this band with us. If you're using an antenna other than a dipole, you must keep a record of the gain of your antenna. What is the recommended way to break into a phone contact?
Bravo.
Bravo.
Say your call sign once. And if you don't get a response, wait for another pause in the conversation, say your call sign once again. Generally, who should respond to a station in the contiguous 48s calling CQDX? Now think about where the person is calling from, and it will make answering it easier.
Charlie.
It is Charlie, any station outside the lower 48. What is the voluntary band plan restriction for U.S. stations transmitting within the 48 contiguous states in the 50.1 to 50.125 megahertz band segment? This is sort of getting to the DX window concept that we talked about.
Bravo. Oh, Alpha.
Oh, Alpha. Yeah. Anyway, you have to paint the context to where the person is calling CQ from, and then the answer becomes a lot easier to discern. Which of the following indicates you are looking for an HF contact with any station?
Charlie.
Charlie, exactly. Repeat CQ a few times, followed by this is, then your call sign a few times, then pause to listen. Rinse and repeat. Why do many amateurs keep a station log?
Delta.
Delta.
Yeah, help with the reply if the FCC requests information about your station, which I doubt they ever will, but that's the answer. Which of the following is required when participating in a contest on HF frequencies?
Charlie.
Yep, it is Charlie. Identify your station according to normal FCC regulations. These other things, some of them are good. Submitting a log to the contest sponsor is a great thing to do. QSL cards are wonderful, but the real answer that they're looking for, identify your station. And this one, which of the following is good amateur practice for net management? Bravo. Have a backup frequency in case of interference or poor conditions. Which mode is most commonly used for voice communications on frequencies of 14 megahertz or higher?
Alpha.
Yep,
Alpha.
that's our magic number 9 that I wanted you to memorize. And they made it easy for us because they gave us the frequency. Now the next one, they're giving us bands. Which mode is most commonly used for voice communications on 160, 75, and 40 meter bands?
Bravo.
It is Bravo, lower sideband. They're all below 9 megahertz. Which mode is most commonly used for single sideband voice communications in the VHF and UHF bands?
Alpha.
Alpha, upper sideband. They're above 9 megahertz. Which mode is most commonly used for voice communications on 17 and 12 meters?
Alpha.
That's alpha, and of course you need to know that those bands are above 9 megahertz, either because you know it, or you can use your 300 divided by thing to figure it out if you don't. Which mode of voice communications is most commonly used on the HF amateur bands? Voice communication.
Charlie.
Single sideband. Yep, that's the rage today. Which of the following is an advantage of using single sideband as compared to other analog voice modes on the HF amateur bands?
Delta.
Delta, less bandwidth used and greater power efficiency. Our garden hose is more focused. Which of the following statements is true of single sideband?
Charlie.
Bravo.
Okay, well, it is Bravo. Only one sideband is transmitted. The other sideband and carrier are suppressed. And single sideband is not the only voice mode authorized. We didn't talk about other ones, but there's digital voices as well. So that makes B the only one that's completely correct. Why do most amateur stations use lower sideband on 160, 75, and 40 meters?
Delta.
It is Delta,
Delta?
commonly accepted amateur practice. Everybody's going to expect you to be on that sideband, on those frequency bands. Okay, we're going to take a break now because we've been going for about an hour and I needed to take a drink of water, right? And you need to clear your head for a little bit. So we're going to be talking about HF operating techniques when we come back from our break. So take 5 minutes and get your mind off this for a few minutes or get a sip of water, whatever you need to do. We'll be back in 5. Okay, we're back. So we're going to do the second half of section 2.1, and then we'll be doing section 2.2. 2.2 has only got 3 pool questions in it, so that'll go fairly quickly. I also want to do a couple of demos before we're done tonight, so we'll probably take the full 2 hours. So these are the topics we're going to be talking about during this half of section 2.1. So HF receiving, there's a lot of controls affecting the receiver. So VHF-M radios, you typically just select a channel, and you've got squelch and volume controls. HF radios have many more controls because they're designed for non-channelized operation, continuous tuning. There's a lot more noise problems, so there's noise reduction and notch filters and things of that nature. Digital signal processing is really a game changer because it does a wonderful job on reducing noise and reducing adjacent channel interference. So these are some differences between the two. Now there's 2 ways that are commonly used for single sideband phones. Some people will use a handheld microphone or a headset. Headsets are really wonderful because you can hear better. They block out external noise. This is what I use most of the time with a boom on it though. Yeah, this one's got a boom. So push to talk works just like it does on VHF and UHF. There is a feature called voice operated transmit. The idea of voice operated transmit is when you start speaking, your radio senses that there's some voice there and it turns on the transmitter for you automatically. And that can be pretty handy for contesting, but if you're in a noisy environment, it can be a really bad thing. And Gary has a story, but we'll get to that in a minute. So VOX, or voice operated transmit, allows hands-free operation. So it's great for contesting and if you're doing a round table on a network. VOX is also used for CW and digital, but in a different sense. The same timer that works for VOX on single sideband, the same timers are used to control how long the transmitter stays keyed on CW. So when I first saw this, I was very confused. Now, does anybody have a cat, a kitty cat, meow meow? Well, cats and rocking chairs are a bad combination if you're running VOX, because if you rock over the cat's tail and it yowls, well, your transmitter will transmit that. And I think you had a good one, Gary, last time we taught this.
Well, it's a true story on HF with voice-operated switching with the microphone that's there. And if you're making noises in the shack, well, the transmitter is going to transmit. And of course, you're tuning across the band, and all of you hear some. You hear going. Yeah, somebody was sleeping in their ham shack with VOX on, and we all got treated to that. So don't do that.
So yeah, so VOX can be convenient, but it can get you in trouble as well. It's really hard to identify your station according to FCC rules if you're sleeping. So I'll warn you about that too. So there's some special controls when using VOX. There's something called VOX gain that you use that to say how much sound does there need to be before it'll turn on the transmitter. That's that idea. VOX delay, that will hold the transmitter on for a few milliseconds or half a second after you finish talking so that your transmitter isn't clicking on and off continually. And then there's an anti-VOX feature. You don't want your receive audio to be triggering your VOX transmit. So that's the idea of an anti-VOX control. You can adjust that so that effect doesn't happen. Not all radios have all of these features, but I wanted to introduce you to the concepts. No blue text here. So HF phone procedures, it's the same basic idea as 2 meters, VHF, UHF. Phonetics are important, we talked about. Q signals, even though Q signals were originally conceived for CW, they've come into common use on sideband as well. So very commonly in a sideband contest, somebody will give their exchange and then they'll say QSL as a question, meaning did you copy that? And the other side will say QSL, yep, I did. And then they move on to the next contact. So that's just an example. So there's several that you'll hear on sideband all the time. So what you want to do though is avoid CB talk. I have a good friend who is just very patient and kind. So this new operator on, and maybe some of you have done this, I don't know. New operator, new technician came on and was doing, 10-4, good buddy, blah, blah, blah. And my friend came back and said, well, that's kind of CB talk, and that's frowned upon in the ham bands. We don't do that here. And the guy was embarrassed, but he said, oh, okay, I understand. So 10 codes aren't used, considered obsolete and bad form, and plain speech is more effective anyway, because everybody knows what that means. So just in case you didn't know. All right, HF, CW transmitting. Morse code is alive and well on amateur radio. It used to be you had to pass the Morse code test to get your license. At the very beginning, the novice class license, which isn't around anymore, was 5 words a minute. General was 13. Extra was 20 words per minute. But there's no code required at all. But it's more popular now than it ever has been. So it's worth learning. It's a different aspect of the hobby. Don't have to do it, but I'd encourage you to. I've been doing a lot of CW contesting over the last year and a half, and I really love it. So what do they use? What do we use? Straight keys, okay, bugs, dots one way, just continuous carry the other, continuous carrier, so you form dashes by holding that down. Iambic paddles. This is kind of a neat concept because if you, the normal convention is the left paddle will send dots, the right paddle will send dashes continuously. If you hold both of them down together, it'll go back and forth, dots and dashes, da-da, 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 as long as you hold them down. And then keyboards. Some hams, because of physical limitations, can't operate a paddle anymore, due to age or whatever, but keyboards are effective. You can use a keyboard, you can type on a keyboard, and there's software that will transmit that keyboard communication into transmitted CW. So some hams, that's the only way they can do it. So modern radios often offer full break-in, or QSK, which we talked about earlier. Most radios will do that. A little bit more. The concept of zero beating, back in the good old days, the old days, when the transmitters and receivers were separate boxes and had to be switched, between them, it was a real art to get your receiver and transmitter on the same frequency. So the concept of zero beating is adjusting the transmitter frequency to the frequency of a received signal. So this we need to know for the pool, but most modern transceivers, if you tune in a CW signal to a certain tone frequency, like maybe 600 hertz, when you transmit, that's going to be matched. It's handled by your transceiver. But the concept is adjusting the transmit frequency to the received frequency of the received signal. And the audio tone will sound the same in both. RST, readability, strength, tone. So you'll typically, a perfect CW signal, if you're giving somebody a signal report, would be 599. 5 is perfectly readable. 9, very strong signal, and the tone, 9 means it's a pure tone. A tone is a little bit confusing. You might want to look this up or Google it, or maybe I'll send you a chart here. But it used to be back in the days of spark transmitters and early builds of equipment, you could have something where the transmitter was drifting around in frequency. It might have a hum or a buzz on it. That was the purpose for this tone thing. But a perfect signal would be 599. The higher the number, the better. Some examples in CW, they'll typically send a 5NN, because N is a lot shorter than a 9. And N is called a cut number, or an abbreviation for a number. And in contests, all contest contacts are 599, okay? Doesn't matter how strong they are or not, they're all 599. Some interesting history behind that, which we won't try to get into, but that would be normal. Or if it was a sideband contest, the signal report would always be 59. Now, if there's an effect on older equipment where as you're holding down your key, your straight key, the tone, the frequency is drifting a little bit. So instead of da 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 dit, you get da dit, where it's floating all over the place. Very musical and very odd, but you do hear this on the air. That's called chirp, when the sound of the received signal is drifting as you're doing dots and dashes. So you'd add a C to the end of the signal report. So 579, perfectly readable, reasonably strong signal. But it's got a chirp. That's what the C means. More on transmitting. CW electronic keyer we talked about. I think this is the one that I've got. It's called the Bengali signature. If you've been involved with CW for a little while, most hams aspire to get a Bengali. My wife had a business raising and selling African violets, and the business was doing really well. So 3 or 4 years ago, we invested in an ICOM 7610 and this particular key because she had the money. So I've named the radio after her. So we appreciate that. And we do Parks on the Air together, and I just got her introduced to contesting a couple weeks ago. So we enjoy the hobby together. But anyway, this is my key. Bengali, they're $300-400 for a key. $100 venture key will work just fine. That's what I used for the first several years after I got active again. So the keyer, now if the dots and dashes are dependent upon which pedal you push on the keyer, well, how does that get translated into dots and dashes? Well, that's with an electronic keyer, and most modern transceivers have a keyer built into them. They'll look at the switch closure of the dot or the dash and convert that into a series of properly spaced dots and dashes. The external keyers are sometimes used, a different box than what's built into the radio for more flexibility or features, and they can be controlled by software. So in my case, my contesting software talks to a box like this. It's a one-keyer USB, which then sends the properly spaced CW to the transmitter. I'm still using a key, but if the computer decides that it wants to service an interrupt or something like that, this prevents the timing from being wrong. So different flavors of keyers, including a keyboard shown over here. More on CW procedures. I think we said this before. Best speed to answer CQ is the same speed that it was sent, because the operator is signaling to you that that's what he can handle. So you want to reply at the same speed. Now there's something called pro signs that are used in CW. Like at the end of our conversation, you'll send a K, which is the same thing as saying over in voice, to control the flow of the contact. And pro signs are typically 2 letters sent as a single Morse character, all run together. So AR, A is dida, R is dida-dit, but an AR is dida-dida-dit. It's all run together. So that indicates the end of a formal message. That is one of the pool questions. SK is the end of your communication. I'm all done. SK I like to think of as silent key. It's at the end of the conversation. BT. Do you ever notice when people are talking, they say and ah and things like that? Well, BT is the same as an or an ah. It's a little separation between thoughts in CW. So you'll see somebody, you'll hear somebody give you some information, and then they'll say da 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 da, which is BT, or just a brief pause as they're changing gears to a different sentence or different subject. KN means listening only for a specific station or stations. Usually in CW, when you're talking to somebody else, you'll end your transmission to them with the letter K, which means, okay, it's your turn, over, go ahead, and take it over. If you don't want anybody else to jump in, to break in, you can send KN, which means listening only for a specific station or stations. I don't think this is used very much unless it's in a contest and there's all kinds of people trying to call. Whoever's running or calling CQ might give a call sign and then say KN, meaning all the rest of you people hold off so I can work this guy. So that's the only place that I've heard it used. So 2 here that will appear in the pool, AR and KN, and the concept of a pro sign I wanted you to understand. Here's some more abbreviations. There's a whole pages of these that you can look up online. WX for weather, thanks. The letter C means yes. 73, best wishes. 88, by the way, is love and kisses. You don't hear too many hymns using that one. Q signals, we've already talked about. I think just about all of these. And there's probably 30, 40, 50 of these altogether. But these are the common ones. And again, the blue ones you'll need to know. And right on to some questions. When sending CW, what does a C mean when added to the RST report?
Alpha.
Alpha, that's chirp, chirpy or unstable signal. What does the Q signal QRN mean?
Delta.
Delta.
I'm troubled by static. It's the context of the pool. Why are signal reports typically exchanged at the beginning of an HF contact?
Alpha.
Alpha. Allow
Alpha.
yes, to allow each station to operate according to conditions, lower power, point antennas, etc. Which of the following statements is true of Vox operation versus PTT operation?
Bravo.
Bravo.
Bravo. It allows you to transmit while you're sleeping. It allows hands-free operation. Which of the following describes full break-in CW operation, or QSK? Uh-oh. Did I trip you on this one? Full break-in. That's when you can hear.
Delta.
It is delta, yes. Transmitting stations can receive between code characters and elements. It's a fabulous feature for contesting.
But it is kind of freaky the first time you try it.
Yeah, because you're hearing all of this other stuff there and it's confusing you. But it's a wonderful thing when you're contesting. What should you do if a CW station sends QRS?
Alpha.
Alpha. That means slower. QRS, please send slower. QRQ means faster, but you don't hear that very often. What does it mean when a CW operator sends KN at the end of a transmission? That's Charlie, listening only.
Charlie.
Yeah, listening only for a specific station. Everybody else, hold off. What is the best speed to use when answering a CQ in Morse code?
Bravo.
It's Bravo, yes, the fastest speed at which you are comfortable copying, but no faster than the CQ. So if somebody's calling CQ at 20 words a minute and you come back to him at 15, it would be considerate of that person calling CQ to back down to your speed so that you can both handle it. What does the term zero beat mean in CW operation?
Delta.
Delta, matching the transmit frequency to the frequency of a received signal. Correct. What pro sign is sent to indicate the end of a formal message using CW?
Charlie.
It is Charlie, AR.
Charlie.
Dit, if you care. Okay, what does the Q signal QSL mean?
Charlie.
Yep, received and understood. Most of us know about QSL cards, and that makes this one easy. What does the Q signal QRV mean?
Delta.
Delta, I'm ready to receive, or this is when I'm going to be operating. What is the function of an electronic keyer?
Bravo.
Bravo, automatic generation of dots and dashes for CW operation. Much, much faster than a straight key once you get used to it. All right, into emergency operation. A few points to go over here, and then I've got some supplemental information that I think will be very valuable to you. So emergency in general, what is an emergency? Okay, in the terms of the way that the law is written, it's something that has to do with safety of human life or the protection of property. That doesn't mean that you just ran over your iPhone. It means that the forest is burning down or something like that. So it's a big deal, human life or major property protection. So special rules come into play for emergencies. You can go outside the published rules, and the trick is you can use any frequency in any mode available to you to get a message through in a true emergency. So you can go outside your band, you can transmit on public service frequencies if your radio is capable of it. Anything, you're allowed to do anything that you physically can, but you better have a good reason for doing it, because you might be asked later. Were you
Yeah,
going
you
to
can
say?
have some explaining to do if you transmit
Yeah.
on public safety frequencies.
Yes,
so.
exactly. But if there's a forest fire going on, or there's an active shooting incident going on, you're authorized to use any means necessary. But the communication must directly relate to the immediate need.
And your last slide there is very important. If there are no other means of communications reasonably available.
Yeah.
So if cell phone service is still up,
Yep.
call 911.
Exactly. Yep, thank you. Here's just a picture of a net. This would be like a traffic net, and it's kind of hard to see these here, but these are times here. You'd submit something like a radiogram out at this end, and it can propagate across the nation to somebody from South Carolina to California through an organized network. So there's basically three types of net. There's the emergency nets, and a lot of times these come into play on standard 2-meter ordinary nets, if you want to call it that you've all probably operated on. They become emergency nets in the time of an emergency. There's traffic nets, which I've kind of given a picture of here, and then of course social or topical, but they don't relate to emergencies, but they can be pressed into service during an emergency. So normally a net, there will be a network control station. It would be one operator who's coordinating all of the traffic amongst the people checking in. So you'll check in from, in my case, Spartanburg, South Carolina, and if there's some kind of a welfare need or whatever during an emergency, somebody would say they need to get a message to their Aunt Sally in Spartanburg, Dave, would you be able to do it? If so, then the network control the net control manager would have that traffic passed to me, and I'd try to deliver it. So the network control station runs the net. It's a directed net in this case, meaning everybody goes through the network control station. And best, if you want to get involved with this, first of all, participate in the 2-meter nets in your area, or the HF nets. Listen for a while and see how they operate, then check into them so that you know how to do it during an emergency. There's 2 flavors of organizations dedicated to emergency communications or emergency operation. One is called ARES, Amateur Radio Emergency Service. It's organized by the ARRL. And the easiest way to remember this one is AR from ARES, is Amateur Radio Relay League, AR. So any licensed ham can be a member. Teams are led by emergency coordinators at the local level. Leadership is completely within the ARRL, the Section Emergency Coordinator, and the mission is to provide communication assistance to local and regional government and relief agencies. There's training available for people involved with this, and it's an organized structure. This is all within the ARRL structure. Then the other one is RACES, and I'd like to think of the letter C in RACES as being associated with civil, RACES, civil, Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service, sponsored through government agencies. RACES is actually enshrined in federal law. So it's a part of the amateur radio service in the FCC rules, and you must register with a local civil defense organization to be a part of this and take their training. All RACES communication must be under the direction of a civil defense organization. And then 2 pool questions. Only, and this is important, only FCC licensed amateurs may be a control operator of a RACES station. Okay, and then this other one is kind of an oddball question, but you need to know it. RACES training drills and tests may be routinely conducted without special authorization for no more than 1 hour per week. I can't imagine very many people caring about that unless, of course, you're involved with RACES. So these are 2 organizations, RACES and ARES, that come into play in emergencies. And here again, I'm saying that you can make any transmission necessary for essential communications to facilitate relief. And as I said, you can use any means necessary and communicate that way if there is no other way to get there. Distress calls. Well, what do you do if you hear a distress call? Well, first acknowledge the station in distress and determine what assistance may be needed. You stop all other communication and try to help where you can. Immediately suspend your existing contact and try to obtain assistance. And then stand by to receive the location, the nature of the emergency and what assistance is required, and then relay the information to the proper authorities. Kind of common sense stuff. Distress calls. Well, what if you are the station in distress? On voice, Mayday is the standard request for emergency assistance. On CW, it's SOS. Identify your transmission with your call sign. Give your location with enough detail to be located. Describe the assistance that is needed. Dave Kassler, in his overview on this chapter, had something interesting to say. That's if nobody responds to you, give this critical information anyway, because maybe somebody's listening, but they need to know where you are.
And most important of all, location.
Location,
They can't send
absolutely.
you help if they don't know where you are.
Absolutely, yep. GPS coordinates would be wonderful, or major intersections. They need to know where you are. Okay, just a few practice questions. What is the first thing you should do if you're communicating with another amateur station and hear a station in distress break in?
Delta.
Bravo. Acknowledge the station in distress and determine what assistance may be needed. Stop everything you're doing and do what you can to help. Who may be the control operator for an amateur radio station transmitting in RACES to assist relief operations during a disaster?
Alpha.
Yep.
Alpha.
If you're operating in the amateur radio bands, you have to be an FCC licensed amateur. How often may RACES training drills and tests be routinely conducted without special authorization?
Charlie.
Charlie.
Yep, no more than 1 hour per week. Very good. Now we're going to review a little bit of what we talked about last week and then go on to some other things that I think are going to be very helpful to you outside of the pool questions. So what you do between classes. Remember last week we talked about spaced repetition, using self-testing as a recall mechanism, and accept that permanent learning takes time. We want to sell a brick wall of learning, not this mess. And here we've got a picture of the forgetting curve, and this one would be the remembering curve here. So this is super important. There's a book that I recommend. Here it is, over on the calculator cam. That might be a little bit too big for you. Gotta go the other way. Here we go. It's called the General Q&A book. And what this is, it has all of the questions in the question pool. Let me zoom in a little bit here.
Can you go flatten it out there?
Yeah. So you'll find the question, and they're arranged according to the question number. So if you're going through a practice test and you get G3A05 wrong, you can grab this book, and this book is in the order of questions, and then you can see what the right answer is, and there's a nice little paragraph telling you why the right answer is the right answer. And we had a recommendation from a past student that I thought was just totally awesome. That student said that what he would do when he got a question wrong, he'd put a Post-it flag on it. Okay, so here's a book with, you can see that there's a number of Post-it flags on it. And then what he would do was he'd work on eliminating the flags. He could go back and review the ones that he was having trouble with. And at the end of each one of these is a reference back to the General Class License Manual that tells you what page to look on to learn more about it. Or you can Google on the subject or whatever. So to me, this is a real worthwhile book to have as you're studying. It's optional, you don't have to. This is a paper one. It's also available, I believe, as a electronic copy or Kindle book, which means you can search on it electronically. So highly recommended. And then, and here's a link. Now there's, I wanted to do a brief demo of how to use the ARRL practice site. First of all, I gotta get this turned off. There we go. And that's going to be on the screen here in a second. And this link will work for you when you get the PDF of the presentation tomorrow. Or if you want to write it down, it's ARRL Exam Review, all as one word, ARRL Exam Review.appspot.com, which we see up here at the top. And that's what the link goes to. So I'm going to actually log into this. Let's see how it works. So I'm going to click Login. This is free, whether or not you're an ARRL member. Log in. And once you've created your login, it'll be the same credentials as you use on ARRL if you're an ARRL member, but you don't have to be. You just establish your own login credentials. So this is me. I hid my password, so you can't access my bank information. No. Okay, so main menu, just walk through this quickly. 3 options. Practice exam, you're not ready for that because we're only on chapter 2 and there's 10 or 11 chapters here that we got to go through, 10 I guess. So you can do that when you get closer to the end, but we want to do review for exam. We're working on the general class test. And we want to review, what are the options? Chapter, sub-element, review. Okay, review by chapter is what we want. Okay, and I'm going to go to chapter 2, which we just did tonight. And you have the option of select all or the sections, individual ones. I'm going to do select all. Okay, and then click review. And it's going to bring up 1 of 41. There's 41 pool questions in chapter 2. So they're going to present a question and the answers. Which of the following is required by the FCC rules when operating on the 60-meter band? All right. Now, what is the answer? Does anybody remember? I think it was
Alpha.
A. Alpha, okay. Now look what happens when I click alpha. It turns green and gives me a check mark. That's awesome. Okay. So I'm going to click next. Now we're on 2 of 41. Let's get this one wrong on purpose. See what happens. What mode is most commonly used for voice communication on frequencies of 14 megahertz or higher? And I'm going to say lower sideband because it's the wrong answer. It's going to turn red, put an X there, and put a check mark saying that that was upper sideband. They left off the word stupid. So, but at any rate, upper sideband was the correct answer. So you can go through all 41 questions this way. And then when you're done, return to main. And then if I want to, I can say review progress, and it'll tell me how many right and how many wrong I got. And if I want, I can reset this and start all over again. So I'd highly recommend that you use this tool, get registered for it if you're not already. It'll let you do that, and review all of chapter 2.
So you want us to start practicing
Yes,
tests on chapter 2?
absolutely, absolutely. And it'll let you review all of the questions. Remember the forgetting curve? If you tomorrow will go through these questions, it'll refresh you. And then a couple of days later, do it again. And then when Gary does chapter 3 next week, you can do 2 and 3. You know, and keep working at it. You know, every couple days, pick a chapter and go through it, and it'll keep it fresh for you. All right, so I'll go back to the main presentation. All right, so the assignment for next week, we're not done yet, hang in there yet. Go through the ARRL exam practice questions for chapter 2, like we just described. And if you've seen it once, it'll come back. I know I went through that quickly, but you'll have an idea of what to do once you get into it. Okay, there's 41 questions. Okay, you do this while chapter 2 is still fresh in your mind, like tomorrow, preferably. Okay, rinse and repeat. Practice with your calculator. Do some simple things. Review the part that we covered tonight if you need to. And then for next week, you want to read chapter 3. Gary will talk about that in a few minutes. Now, I wanted to go through the basics of the TI-36X Pro. I listed my contact information again. So the plan is just to do an overview, essential keys, some basic calculations, the equation operating system. You don't need to understand that. That just says that if you put it in the same way that it appears in the formula that you'll be using, it'll give you the right answer. It knows how to handle all of the calculations, order of operations, that thing. We'll look at some of the math needed for the general exam and work a couple of problems. Now this was in the handout that I passed out or sent late this afternoon, so hopefully you got it. This might look a little bit scary, but I'm going to tell you something very valuable. This one page, I love one-page documents. If you can handle this one page, you'll have all of the math that you need for the general class exam. Now it's spread out through, well, most of it's in chapter 4, but there's a lot of scary stuff in chapter 4. You don't need to know any more than what's here on this one page to be able to handle the pool questions. And at this point, you can say something if you want. Like, thank you, Dave. Okay.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Dave. Okay. So what
Thank
do we
you,
need?
Dave.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. So.
Good job.
Yeah, very good. So you won't understand all of this yet because we haven't covered it, but you can look at it, okay? And we're going to be getting into this in a little depth when we get to chapter 4, a week after next. And we're going to do chapter 4 over 2 weeks. So we're going to talk about ear and pi. This is EIR, basic Ohm's law. Pi, this is the power one. Okay. Now, we're going to be adding something in the general class that we didn't have in the technician. Those are power formulas involving resistance. We're going to be talking about peak and RMS conversion. Don't get upset about this yet because we're going to go over it carefully and slowly. And there's some facts that we need to know about reactance. There's some facts we need to know about decibel values. But if we can just absorb the bolded items in this chart, you won't need to work any of the math involved in getting at the right answers to the pool questions. So I'm trying to dispel some of the fear that some of you may have if you've looked at chapter 4 and say, oh, I can't do this. Yes. You can. We're going to help you through it and make it a lot easier than what you might think. So here's just a quick review of EIR, Ohm's law formula, EIR. And here we've got a picture of a volt pushing an amp through a restriction in a pipe. So Ohm restriction. Volt's got to work really hard to get the amps pushed through that pipe. It's going to work up a sweat. Power lost in resistance. It takes the form of heat. There's a bunch of parallels here. The way these formulas work, you just take your thumb and cover up whatever it is that you're wanting to solve for. So if you're wanting to solve for voltage, you cover this up with your thumb and you're given the formula in it's I times R. If you're wanting to solve for current, put your thumb over this, it's E over R. So if you can remember ear, you can remember how the formulas work and solve any Ohm's law problems related to this. Again, we'll be going over this application-wise in a future class, but this really makes it easy. And I was careful to add, what E, I, and R all mean, volts, amps, and ohms. And again, we'll expand on this. Next, what we want to do is a little overview of the TI-36X Pro. So I'm going to go over to the calculator cam. And well, before I do that though, this is what we're going to look at here, how to turn it on and off, how the shift key works, and how these most often used keys work. So, and again, this is an overview. We'll look at it on the calculator. We always start with clear. I want you to know that I spent a lot of extra money to get a calculator with all of these red circles on it, because I love you guys and gals. I'll always start with clear. Here's clear. The keys for simple arithmetic are here, divide, multiply, etc. The number keys, of course. The enter key is the same as the equals key on most calculators. So let's practice. So let's go over to the calculator cam. Get this set up here. Been using it for other things tonight, so there we go. Good. So the first thing that we want to do is turn it on. Well, you'd think that would be easy, right? There just happens to be an on button down here at the bottom. We'll press on, and it pops up. You can see a little blinking box there. And most of the calculations in the book are to 2 decimal places. So what I'd like to have you do, well, let me just give you an example. The pi, you probably all know, is 3.1416, blah, blah, blah. And there happens to be a pi key on the calculator. So I'm going to press pi. It shows a pi. And then I'm going to press enter, which is equals. And it says pi. Now, mathematicians love that, but us normal mortals can't relate to that very well. There's a key in the calculator that I call the answer toggle key. It's right above the enter key, and every time you press the answer toggle key, it will give you the answer in a different format. So I'm going to try pressing it once, and here I've got 3.145 blah blah blah. Press it again. It's going to say the same thing. Okay, but we don't want to work with this big bunch of numbers. So what I'm going to do is press clear. And then we're going to set the calculator up so it'll read just 2 decimal points. So to do that, that's the mode key. Introduce some other buttons. Along here you see degree is flashing. Degree, radians, grads, those are for angles. We don't care about that. This is the navigation key over here. It'll go left, right, up, and down. So what I want to do is go down. I'm going to press it twice to get to float. And then I'm going to press the right button to get over to 2. So instead of floating to a great big bunch of numbers, I want it to only display 2 decimal points. So I've done that. Now if I press enter, you'll notice it's flashing right now. If I press enter, now it becomes float disappeared, and now 2 is flashing. It took me forever to figure out how to get out of this menu, but I'm going to save you all kinds of grief and just tell you, if you press clear, you're out. So now let me do the pi thing again. Okay, there's pi. I'm going to press enter, get this pi, which is useless to us, use the answer toggle key. Now it comes up 3.14. Much easier to deal with. If I do want to see the whole thing, if I press the answer toggle key again, there's the whole thing, which you normally won't care about. So I'm going to clear this. We've gone through some basic navigation now. Now we're going to do a really hard calculation. You ready for this? It's 27. Let me get this card over so you can see it. There we go. So 27 plus 3. Let's see how he would do that. Okay, we've pressed clear. You press clear as your first step always. So 2, 7 plus 3 and enter. And I got 30, 30.00 because we told it to do 2 decimal points. All right, I think everybody should have been able to follow me there. Now some more concepts on the next one. I'm going to press clear, and I want to do 16 divided by 3.5. Okay, so that's a number over a number. There's a key on the calculator that we're going to use. I call it box over box, or this is the fraction key. I'm going to press that, and I get a box over a box with the top box blinking. Okay, it's looking for an entry there. So I'm going to press 1, 6. Now, how do you suppose we're going to get down to the bottom, or the denominator? Well, we'll use the navigation diamond, press it down, and now the bottom box is blinking. So I'm going to press 3.5. And I've got 16 divided by 3.5. And notice that this is exactly the way it appears in my problem. Every problem we're going to do in the general class math is going to work the same way. It's going to look just the same on the calculator as it does on the problem we're setting up. I'm going to press enter, 4.57. Okay, now we're going to try 12 times 2. I'm going to clear. That's just 12 times 2. Enter. There's 24. Okay, so those are some really basic things. Let's try something a little bit more advanced. let's find the area of a circle, which we don't need to do for our exam, but I want to demonstrate how the calculator works. Clear? The formula for the area of a circle is pi r squared. So, and the radius in this case is going to be 3. So pi r squared, how are we going to put that in? Well, we already showed you the pi key. There's pi. Now, if we put it in the next number, the calculator is going to know we want to multiply that. So r is 3. And then if we want to square 3, there's an x squared button here. And notice how this now appears exactly the way that it does in the formula we were trying to calculate. And press enter, and we get 9 pi. Well, that's useless. What in the world would we want that for? Remember our answer toggle? Okay, press that. 28.27. Now, mathematicians love 9 pi, but us mortals would rather see 28.7.
Yeah, but Dave, there's something wrong with your basic premise because everyone knows that pi are round.
Exactly right.
Pi are not square.
The calculator's not smart enough to know that. And then the last one we're going to go to one more level of complexity now. Let me press clear. This is a power formula that we're going to need for our general class pull question. Power equals E squared over R. So we see that this is a fraction. So I'm going to press the fraction button. Box over box. E is 400 volts. And it needs to be squared. So I'm going to press the x squared key. And notice how it's formatted there. And press the down arrow to get to the denominator. R is 800 ohms. Press enter. And we wind up with 200 watts. So my goal here was just to kind of walk you through some of the features of the calculator. So I'll jump back to the presentation. We're almost done here. So we've done these calculations. We're only going to need simple arithmetic, square roots, and formula entry. We will not need trigonometry, and we will not need to do any log calculations, although there's lots of them in the book. So we just went through this one, the area of a square pi, or square, yeah, right. You know what I'm trying to say. So yeah, we went through that. Here's the one that we did, the power problem, step by step, which we've done. So problem-solving approach. Always, you're going to look at a problem and say, I don't know how to do this. So determine what the question is asking. A lot of questions can be answered without a calculator. I'm going to help you know which ones those are. Write down the values you're given. Decide what formula applies. Make any conversions needed. So it's a step-by-step thing. Plug in the values, press enter, and you can do it. Many more examples. So where do we start? We start out with, I can't do this. This is way above me, okay? Then you go, I want to do it. So how do I do it? I'll try to do it. I can do it. I will do it. And this is really satisfying when you get up to here. You can all get there. And we're at the success point. All right, do you want to say anything about next week, Gary?
Sure. So next week, if my mic is on? Not yet. There, now my mic is on. Next week is Chapter 3, everybody's favorite, Rules and Regulations. Well, actually, they are kind of nice because there's no math involved generally. So, Rules and Regulations next week. Come on back. We're out of time for tonight. We don't have time for a chat. So let me just say, 73 will get you home on time. Oh, wait, you're already home. See you next week.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, Gary.
One moment.
Thank you. Thanks a million.
Thank you. Appreciate